Thank you, Chair. This is an issue. I was saying that if your constituted committee was around, this is not an issue that we should be here, but we are here to supplement already what you know. The problem is obvious. It is known by all consumers of our electricity in this country. It's an obvious matter that everybody knows why we pay exorbitant amount of money, of which has scared a lot of people away from doing business with us. But there is a little bit history of our power and lighting in this country. In 1906, formation of Nairobi Power and Lighting came into place, run by a few syndicates, few Wazungus. And when the Ordinance Number 5 was put in place in 1922, it did stipulate how the generation of the electricity in this country will be done and who will be managing and how the payments will be being made and how it will be spread in other places in this during those colonial days. 1938, other sister nations in East Africa, Uganda, Tanzania, they developed an interest to what Kenya was doing and what was coming out of Kenya, and they accepted to have one electricity generating organ known as East African Power and Lighting. 1948, the issue came that the governments must own that particular company of East African Power and Lighting and give it maximum support, the three governments of East Africa. And in 1954, we in Kenya, we entered into an electricity act that established Kenya Power and Lighting Company as our own company now. 1997, Chair, the new Energy Act aimed at structuring the electricity industry and the division of Kenya Power and Lighting Company into separate entities for generation, transmission, and distribution of electricity was put in place. All these aimed at strengthening the provision of electricity and making it more cheaper to everybody to have an access to the electricity. Kenya Power and Lighting Company was transformed, that is 2011, into Kenya Power, the current Kenya Power we have. And from 1922 to 1965, this company was run by various CEOs. But let me start where I started associating with this company. This is from 1967. After my employment on 2nd of June in 1967 and trained as a technician by the then East African Post and Telecommunication Administration, we closely worked together with this company, particularly when it comes to provision of services and distribution of services. As we provide communication systems, we must have electricity around, and we worked closely with Power and Lighting Company during those days. I can remember vividly Isaac Lugonzo was the first African to handle issues related as a CEO in 1969, took over from Mr. Elliott, whose term ended in 1968. After various Wazungus from 1922, we had Captain R.G. Vernon, 22 to 24. In 1925-27, but Charles Udall, J.H. Ordan took over from him, up to this time where the first African, Isaac Lugonzo, became the CEO in 1969, and he was succeeded because he was also working for Kenya Shell Company, and that is why he surrendered that position briefly. Not briefly, actually. He was there briefly and left it to Mr. Geshao, who took it over from 1970 to 1983, 13 years. Samuel Ishuru also was the long-serving 19 years from 1984 to 2003. Most of you know Ishuru Samuel, still alive. And then from there, when he left, somebody called Engineer Jasper Duor took for 1 year, and he did put a lot of things in place for only 1 year. It brought a lot of changes to current distribution of electricity. He was succeeded by Mr. Yeko, who was there for 1 year, 2004 to 2005. And as the reforms were taking place in that particular company, they decided to bring Mr. Don Pristerman, who was succeeded by Joseph Njoroge. Later, Joseph Njoroge became PS in the energy sector in the same area. Dr. Ben Chumo took from 2013 to 2016, 3 years, Tarus 1 year. After him, Jared Otieno 1 year, Bernard Ngugi 3 years, Rosemero Duor 1 year, Geoffrey Moody 1 year, up to the current. Now we have a new one, Dr. Engineer Joseph Siror, present. If you look at it, and particularly the turnover of 1 year, that is the majority of the people who have been serving this Kenya Power company. And on comparison purposes, you can see the management of Kenyan has been very consistent. They have had only about 5 CEOs from 2003 to date. Why I'm saying so, you need also critically to look at the management, because a manager or a CEO, when he is put in place, he puts some mechanism in place to make sure the place is so strong and it's well administered, and there are people who are responsible and responsive to management, and the management are also serious and very much responsive to the board. But if we have where people are being in the office for 1 year, no, without checking on the implementation of what they might have put in place, the place becomes chaotic. So as you look into other areas, you must also look into ways and means as per how you can strengthen the management and make sure that any CEO who takes over remains there for some time, so that he can be able to see policies of the administration and any other related managerial issues that he might have put in place being implemented positively or towards the direct way of making sure that the organization remains strong, consistent, and modern. Those are part of the requirement of modern management applications. We at COTU, you are aware, we are a representative board of affiliates. We represent, we have about membership of about 4 million workers. And we are dedicated to safeguarding and advancing the rights and interests of the working people in this country. Low electricity costs are in the best interest of Kenyan workers and the nation as a whole. For us to spur economic growth, we must allow the investors have an access to affordable electricity. High electricity costs have a castigating effect on industries and businesses, hindering their competitiveness on both domestic and international fronts. because nobody is prepared to invest in a country whose electricity is so expensive than the products that he produces or she produces, whatever. We are the Central Organization of Trade Unions in Kenya. We are for conducive business environment that promotes industrial growth, stimulates job creation, enhances job security for workers, and so on, and have all these public sectors that can be strong to accommodate the young men and women who are leaving universities, those young men who are leaving technical colleges and other institutions to join such powerful and well-managed organizations. Electricity is the backbone of economic development, and COTU Kenya aims to enhance Kenya's investment climate, fostering sustainable economic growth that benefits workers and the nation alike. Harnessing renewable sources of energy can significantly reduce dependence on costly fuels and expensive independent power producers, IPPs. We therefore, through this committee, and we are sure you will propose to government to prioritize investment in electricity supply, so that if we do invest in electricity, then we will be in a position to attract both direct and indirect investments in this country. And it is easier. Tanzanians have heavily depended on NSSF Tanzania. The electricity generating plant in Dar es Salaam was 100% built by NSSF Tanzania. In Dodoma, the same. And our NSSF is ready for that. Been a trustee there for a long time. But the problem, Kenyans would prefer such institutions to do business with Ramchikanji, Patel, Makoha, and Onyangos, instead of looking at a big picture that can attract investors in this country. So we can't say there is no money. We have money to revamp the electricity sector, strengthen it, and make sure it's affordable and anybody can harness. I want to thank the successive governments that have been in place for making sure that they spread the provision of electricity throughout our republic. But we must not forget harnessing renewable sources of energy, which can significantly make electricity, continue to make electricity in this country to be cheaper. And that is why through this committee, we know your recommendations will be serious recommendations, because to us, access to affordable electricity is a matter of social justice. Social justice cannot be complete when most of our Kenyans and most of working men and women in this country cannot afford to have electricity connected to wherever they are. Issue related to independent power producers, IPPs. Independent power producers have negatively affected the cost of power in Kenya by making power more expensive. And there is no any country on the earth currently which can allow these independent power producers. Just some people sitting there, when we have a regulatory value, and the regulatory value of everything is our parliament and government. Sitting there, and they are deciding on the prices, on what they, if they are to sell the power that they produce to Kenya Power, then this is what should be the cost. These IPPs include Gulf Power or Power, Electrocana, Wind Power, among others, Kipeto Energy, Africa Geothermal International, Rabai Power Plant, Thika Power Plant, Triumph Power, Iberia Africa, and Garissa Solar Power. I know in Kenya we have people who are fond of telling others that how can we make money? This is the way we can make money. This is a group of money makers. And we shouldn't have money makers in this country. More years after independence, people earn money. We earn after working for money. Some of these companies just sell air to power and lighting, and they are just sitting there. If you constitute a committee of electrical or electricity engineers to audit them, you will find that there is nothing that they are providing to power and lighting. First, the cost of power purchase agreement, the PPAs they sign, is higher than the cost of electricity produced by Kenyan, a state-owned Kenyan. Second, it is obnoxious that most of the power purchasing agreements Kenya Power enters into require payments in foreign exchange. How do we allow that? And you know, some of the requirements of registering a company in this country, you have to declare whether you are a Kenyan or whether you are a foreign. These IPPs are owned by Kenyans. And I have no shame to call them unscrupulous Kenyans because we pay very expensively the issue of electricity. I particularly am part of the victims. And most of the IPPs have tough and long-term contractual obligations that make it hard for any changes to be made. And I think this is where the Parliament comes in handy, to make sure that they put a law in place to stop this nonsense. Our proposal as workers is that Kenya government must revoke all PPAs, these agreements on purchasing that have been signed with various IPPs and fully owned oil power producing companies under parastatal. They can be lumped under Kenyan or any other parastatal to look into those things. If indeed it is true that they are selling electricity, to me they are selling nothing. The government of Kenya must be the sole generating organ for Kenya Power if we are to reduce the cost of electricity in this country. And this is a serious issue. The Kenya government cannot distance itself from private electricity generating plants which are meant to exploit Kenyans and other electricity users. The Kenya government must have overall control over the energy mix by prioritizing the use of cheaper sources of energy, as it used to be, such as hydroelectric, geothermal power, to reduce this overall cost. And this can be done. And the parastatals can be able to do that the way Kenyan has been doing. Can have 2, 3, 4, dealing in supply and generating of cheap electricity. As I had said earlier, on an issue of management, and I think that will be addressed in our memorandum so that we deter this high turnover of CEOs at Kenya Power and Lighting, so that there is consistency and people can be able to put some papers in place or mechanism to grow Kenya Power Company and see and follow it up, and like what is happening there today. The cost of electricity must be reduced. We have no any other way, and the government must come in. This will help with having consistency in terms of people who use electricity. Will be sure that after I have been connected, I will be able to sustain and maintain my electricity. And why it is good to have consistency at the company. Somebody can be able to check on electricity intermittent cuts, because most of those people who use electricity in large farms or in manufacturing industry, they must have standby generators. And I don't think this is the best way for us to go. We must make sure that there is electricity supply without cuts or intermittent interruptions all the time as it is today. And that is why we are saying the government must come in and regulate the electricity. To do so, I repeat, we must tame the IPPs. They must be put out of business with Kenya Power. The Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, EPRA, in Kenya plays a crucial role in regulating the energy sector. And this is where we say, we used to sit on this board. As we are affected, what affects Kenyans most, particularly working people, men and women, is the cost of electricity. And this Act of 2019, Section 12 on representation, must be amended to allow workers to sit on this regulatory board, so that we can be able to voice our concerns as consumers of electricity in this country. And we must also be there to make sure that as we regulate electricity, we don't have people sitting there waiting and getting a lot of money for nothing. We are proposing that the spillage should be reduced, spillage or the electricity that is being used without being counted for must be reduced at Kenya Power by forthwith stopping outsourcing in regards to the maintenance and construction of power lines. They normally outsource private people to install electricity or to build those trunk lines of electricity. And these are people who are not trained by Kenya Power. And after those people having worked for Kenya Power, they are the people who are involved in illegal installation of electricity. Kenya Power must have its own people that are trained, employed permanently without outsourcing, and making sure that the engineering instructions of provision of electricity is adhered to, not as it is today. Find cross-creasing of electricity wires in estates without somebody to make sure that these wires are, the construction of electricity lines are constructed in accordance with the engineering instructions on electricity. Kenya Power must provide more meters. Right now we have so many people who are using electricity without meters, simply that there are no meters. And this is where we have or we lead to commercial losses by Kenya Power. Kenya Powers must streamline its procurement process to hasten procurement of critical materials and remove a lot of vested interests in procurement. This one must be done. And we want also to appeal to government, those well-connected people who own IPPs. Their names should be made public so that Kenyans can know them and make sure that electricity is more cheaper. I know those people who make money, some are senior people in the government, and it is our duty and duty of parliamentarians to come out and carry out research and mention them on the floor of the House. That is what parliamentarians are there for. I want to take this opportunity once again to thank you, Chair, and to make sure that what we have said forms part and parcel of your recommendation. I thank you, Chair, and I want to thank MPs who have made their comments, just getting to what I had said here earlier, and making it more stronger for this committee to come up with an acceptable document. Honorable Mheshimiwa asked why should we sit on the committee of IPRA, and that is a regulatory value. We are the main stakeholders. We must be there because the consumer of what they regulate is a worker. And all our cities, right away from Mombasa to Kisumu and other 47 counties, people who are there workers. And they must have a say on what is going to affect them. On an issue of complications or complicated areas like those purchasing power agreements, the Parliament is the master of all complications in the world. Any Parliament is the master of all complications. So there is no any complicated case that cannot be handled by Parliament. For example, today if you went to Parliament and you amend just one letter in the act, in the current act, you say if it was Kenya Power, put there Kenya Power Limited, that's a new company. IPPG will remain with the old power, and the company will be the same. And in the afternoon, you would have rendered those agreements impotent. So the Parliament is the master of all complications. And this is the power you have. And you must redress this, your power, and use it well for the benefit of the majority of the people you represent. I thank you, Chair.
More radio, 88.2 FM. We are in charge.